This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm David McDonald.
And I'm Sam Merciers. And joining us this week is, for the second time, is composer, performer, songwriter, artist, and thinking person, Corey Dargle. His New Amsterdam album was out on January 27th. He's also playing with the band that performed on that album this coming April the 10th at the Fusebox Festival in Austin. So if you're in that area, be sure and check it out. Corey, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back.
Yeah, so I want to just dive right into your new album, Okay, It's Not Okay. I've listened to it.
Okay.
I've listened to it all the way down in album format on multiple occasions, and I think Dave and I have discussed this. This sounds, the way your voice is treated in this recording sounds like a departure from the releases we've heard from you before.
In what way?
The way the processing works, it always has some processing on it, but in the earlier releases it seemed more straight voice, and here you're using, as an example, in the first track, There's Nothing There, that sort of what might be considered the chorus of the piece is delineated not by the instrumental background track, but by the way the vocal part changes and gets a little more processing and has a little more shimmer to it, a little more reverb to it. That doesn't seem like a common thing on earlier albums.
What I should say about that is that I've grown as a technician, so I'm able to use, I think, more fluently effects in a way that I hope isn't intrusive, but does, as you say, is distinctive but not intrusive. And so, you know, to me, it doesn't sound different from the way my voice is usually processed. But it's interesting to hear from an outsider. I mean, obviously, I've been working on the album for so long, I have no perspective on it anymore. But I appreciate your perspective on it, and I think what you're hearing is just the way that I've grown in terms of the production that I do, and the fact that a lot of what I consider my composing voice comes out in the actual studio process of mixing and producing the albums.
So it strikes me, not that it's always a complete departure from what you've done before, but there seems to me like there's more diversity of the vocal processing among the tracks on the album. So it seemed like before you had kind of this sound that was relatively consistent from track to track, that was almost kind of like the idealized version of the voice for this collection of songs. And then for this new album, there are tracks where it's the vocal processing is very, very minimal, and it sounds almost like you're just in the room singing, and there's not a lot of computer stuff going on. And there are other tracks where it sounds there are very clear electronic processes. Maybe that's what Sam was talking about.
I get what you're saying. Yeah, I did actually make a clear distinction in the way that I was treating the vocals in the pieces with electric instruments and versus the pieces with violin. And the pieces with violin and looping, I tried to minimize the processing of the vocal. But I think in general this album is different from my previous work in that it's all live instruments, but many of the instruments at least are, well, no, they're all amplified, and they all already have some sort of electronic processing going on, even if that's just bare amplification. So from my perspective, every single instrument in every song is treated differently in a way that I haven't done in the past, and the vocal is just another instrument. So I think that may be the distinction here that you're noticing.
Okay, it's integrating the voice more into the orchestration.
It sounds like you don't believe me.
No, I like it. I perfectly agree. I'm thinking of it in the way you described, and I'm saying yes, that's it. I was wondering about, you're going to be doing this at the Fusebox Festival in April with the band that recorded on the album. So I'm wondering, I think anyone who listens to this might be interested in how you're going to do the live orchestrations. So how you're going to pull off these things with live instrumentation. Because some things can be duplicated, I would say, pretty exactly, and then some things that have a lot of studio processing kind of things going on, you're going to have to interpret in some way, it would seem, to perform them live.
Well, for me, the great thing about going to a live show is that you don't necessarily want it to be the same as the recording. I know that's not necessarily the mainstream view, but my view is that the differences between the album and the concert are valuable and interesting. So there are pre-recorded drum tracks. They're not the same. They're not exactly the same as the drum tracks on the album. And we don't always use drum tracks. So some of the songs that have drum tracks, you won't hear drum tracks. So it's more exposed in that respect. And of course, the vocals are not as processed, if at all processed. A little bit of stripping down, which I hope is interesting in that it allows you to hear the different components more clearly in a live format. Of course, you can also see what's being played. But in terms of the core materials, everything is you're not going to hear much variation there. So, for example, all of the violin pieces with loops, it's all done live exactly the way that you hear it on the record. Hopefully, unless Neil makes a mistake, which he rarely does. So, and he's brilliant at doing these loops. It's a really hard thing to pull off live. We're not using click tracks in the violin pieces, so. And there's nothing pre-recorded in terms of the violin loops. So everything has to be executed really, really precisely, and that's one of the thrills of performing the violin pieces from this album in a live situation. I mean, the same is true for the other musicians as well. It's just that, I mean, they're great too, but they don't have the added challenge of performing so precisely that they have to loop over themselves 8 times and keep the tempo steady and all that. But not that they couldn't do it, but they don't get to in this situation.
Sure.
So I wonder, having said that, you said that you've gotten better at using the techniques in the studio, and so I wonder how what sorts of things you've learned over the course of working in the studio, and how you think of the recording process in relation to the compositional process.
The recording process is one thing. What I was talking about was the post-recording process, the production and the mixing, the editing of everything. So I don't write the pieces. I don't write the pieces for that purpose. But once they're recorded, once they get onto a medium that will eventually become a record, an album, then I approach that as a different process than composing for live performance. So that just becomes an extra step and an extra chance for me to embellish what's already there with production techniques. And the way that I've gotten better at it is just that I now know I just know more about what not to do. And so when I try something, when I'm experimenting, I know more quickly if it's working or not. If it's something that will carry through in the production stage. You'll notice that I do all the production and the mastering on this album, so that's also something that I wouldn't have been able to do 4 years ago when my last album came out. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like asking a composer, like, how have you gotten better at composing music? I mean, over the past 4 years. I mean, I don't really know how to answer that except to say that I know better what not to do.
It's interesting that you think of the process of putting together a recording as such a distinct thing, and I'm really happy to hear you say that you don't try to make the performance exactly the same as the recording, and that those are two different things. Because I feel like a lot of times I'll read someone's account of a concert, and the highest praise that they think they can give the concert is that it sounded just like a record, and I never know exactly how to respond to that, because sure, the record probably was flawless because it can be, but it may not have made for the most interesting. Like, if it was exactly the same as the record, then maybe we should have just all gotten in a room with some really good speakers and played the record.
Yeah, that's my feeling. I mean, of course, I appreciate the virtuosity that it takes to replicate a recording, but to treat a recording and a concert as the same thing, it just doesn't make sense to me, even though I know it makes perfect sense to a lot of people. For me, it's like going to a performance and hearing the differences and being surprised and interested in those differences. But for a lot of people, I think going to a concert and hearing the difference between a record and the concert might be sort of disappointing or confusing. I mean, of course, it just depends on how different they are. But I mean, if I'm thinking about, Radiohead is the primary example of a band that does all these crazy things in the production in the studio and somehow manages to replicate them precisely in performance, and that requires a huge amount of skill and technique and talent. But it's just, for me, it's just not quite as interesting as a departure from the recording. But also these, when I'm composing a piece, I'm composing it for live performance usually, and then after the live performance happens, then we make a recording. So that gives me another, more composing to do, which is exciting for me. Yeah. So, in that respect, making the record different is also fun for me because I get to do more experimenting with, sounds and techniques that I didn't get to do in a live performance.
That's I was wondering about so the process, like what instrument you actually sit and write on, because you are writing songs, and that's what I think is what really holds them all together, is that they could be performed in a very pared down, just you playing an instrument format. So when you're actually working on...
Well, you've revealed the secret. It turns out that the live performance is just me and the ukulele, and that's it.
He throws his voice really well and makes it sound like a violin.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you write at the piano, or do you...
Yeah, I do. I write at the piano. I also actually sometimes use notation software to start out, actually, and then sort of create these different textures using just the notation software and listening to it while I'm writing in the computer. And then turning those into something by exporting them into programs that I can then play with keyboards and manipulate the sounds. So in a way, I'm sort of starting out with just counterpoint and melody and just the basic techniques and not worrying about instrumentation. And then later I'll work with that material and figure out, well, how could I orchestrate this with the instruments I have. So sometimes I do that, but I usually do work just on the keyboard, and I don't write the vocal line until everything else is done. So that's a big difference between me and a lot of other singer-songwriters. I don't start with lyrics or vocals. I start with the instruments.
Interesting.
That is very interesting. That's actually kind of like, you referred to yourself as a singer-songwriter, and I actually have that written down: singer-songwriter versus composer. And I didn't know how you self-identified, if you will. But that's an interesting thing. Well, because a singer-songwriter is a skill that I don't have. It's like an integration of your personality and the character of your voice and how you integrate that with whatever instrument you use to make music with. And I don't have that at all. But you have the best of both worlds, so you're sort of combining this abstracted composer idea, so evidenced by coming up with the music first and then matching your voice and text with it. That's really interesting. And I think that might be why every time I listen to something of yours, I think it's some of the most original sounding stuff I've heard. around. Um,
Thank you. I mean, it's part of writing for the instruments first is the strategy there is partly just because I don't want the instrumental parts to sound like accompaniments, even if some people think they do. I mean, that's not my approach. My approach is to write instrumental parts that are interesting enough that they could stand on their own, and then add the vocals later. But what's interesting about adding the vocals later is that then I get to write lyrics and vocal lines that sort of interact with the accompaniment in unexpected ways, or ways that are atypical of what other singer-songwriters might do. So it's that's part of, I don't know if that's the strategy, but or I don't know if it's a symptom or a cause, but it's part of the process. So being a composer, for me, part of that is about making the instruments as interesting, if not more interesting, than the vocal lines. And it's interesting, actually, by the way, that you brought up earlier that the vocals sound so varied, because in a lot of reviews that I've read about this album, one of the primary complaints is that the vocal lines are boring, and that they should be more, I guess, more emotional, which is obviously not my forte. I mean, I could do that, but I choose not to, because what interests me is the emotions for me are already in the words, and so what interests me is creating different layers in the precision and the counterpoint of the instruments and the vocal lines that sort of are counterpoints to the words in a way that are that don't sort of overemphasize the meaning of the words, which I find to be a problem in a lot of music that has lyrics, that the words are just they're painted far too much, far too heavily.
Yeah, that's something that strikes me a lot listening to not just this album, but your previous albums as well. And it's interesting to hear that you compose the instruments as their own unit, and then kind of add the voice as a layer in the system, because I think that's how I hear the music in a lot of ways as well. And the juxtaposition of, in many cases, some pretty intense and sometimes dark lyrics with relatively bright and light sounding instrumental accompaniment, that it never occurred to me that could be a kind of part of the process as well, of creating the thing separately. When you're writing the words, are you thinking about the music that they're going to go with, or are you just writing the words independently as a separate, almost a separate exercise from the music that you've composed already?
Both. Sometimes I have lyrics sitting around waiting to be finished or matched with a particular accompaniment. Usually that's not the case. Usually I know what accompaniment I'm working with, but I haven't written the words until I've completed the accompaniments. I was also going to add, though, that yet another layer of meaning comes in the live performance, where my stage persona and the comments that I make between songs and that singer-songwriter stuff that Sam was talking about earlier, that comes through in a live performance, and that is yet another layer that makes going to see a live performance more rewarding than hearing the album alone. But I don't know, it's hard to convey that in an album. Sorry, I was rambling a bit there.
No,
did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. It could be because when I listened to, I think the first music of yours that I heard was On This Date Every Year, from an EP a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember what really struck me at first was that I didn't catch all of the lyrics the first time. I'm a bad listener of vocal music, and I don't always catch the lyrics the first time I hear something, and because I was really taken in by the violin counterpoint with the looping violin counterpoint in that song, and then only after listening to it another time or two did I realize how really dark the lyrics were. It's about somebody who's gone, and you think
it's
about
a disaster fantasy about a plane
Yeah.
crash. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty awful.
Yeah.
Although there is a bit of humor at the end in the lyrics as well, but yeah, I mean, part of I don't think that you're
The humor is pretty
I don't
dark,
think that
though.
you're a bad listener. I think it's pretty common for people to pay more attention to the music than the lyrics, at least the first time they listen to a song. I think that's pretty normal, actually, and I wish it wasn't normal, but I think it is. And so I could be easier on you and write lyrics that are less interesting and music that's less interesting. But I don't know. I hope it's a rewarding challenge, at least on the second or third listen.
And I like that you describe it as counterpoint too. It's like it is a kind of very large level counterpoint between the feel of the lyrics and the meaning of the lyrics and the meaning of and the feel and the meaning of the music is a really interesting large level counterpoint. So and I think I like that there is that thing that I can keep that I can get when I come back the second time. But it also means that now, at the very least, when I listen to a new recording of yours, Corey, is that I do pay really close attention to that the first time because I'm prepared for it. So I've been warned.
Well, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to. Right. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, it's hard. It's hard for my music to survive as anything other than foreground music. And I don't mean to sound arrogant by saying that, but it's because I could easily write background music or music for film or TV, but and I may do that at some point. But I don't know. I'm just far too interested in the combination of well-written words and well-written music, and again, I'm sounding arrogant here, but I just I can't stop writing music that's more complex than maybe it should be, and yet at the same time I'm trying to make it appeal on a surface level, so that maybe if you don't listen to the lyrics, you're not put off by it, but you're still intrigued and want to listen to it again, I hope.
Well, the quality that really strikes me is I'm not a lyrics listener either, typically, but you insist that I understand the lyrics because of the way they're presented. I can't not hear what you're saying, you know what I mean? So even a person who's not into lyrics can't, it's got that music theater quality where it's very, you're not flowering up the language too much, it's very plain what's happening, and you're speaking clearly, and I can understand exactly what you're saying, which seems like a minor thing, but in pop music, as an analogy, like, that's not the case, even though they're using lyrics.
It's not the case in pop music or classical music, actually. I mean, it's very it's very hard to understand lyrics in a lot of different kinds of music and a lot of different kinds of songs, and I think in some ways that quality has it weakens the role that the lyrics have to play. That, in addition to the fact that most listeners just don't they don't necessarily pay attention or pay as much attention to the lyrics on the first listen as they do the beat or the music or whatever. But there are so many pop musicians, just to take one category, pop rock musicians who write songs where the music is really interesting, but the lyrics are kind of meh. I mean, and for me, there are very, very few people where the lyrics and the music are on a par with each other, are equally interesting. And I think as a lyricist, as a self-taught lyricist, I've grown in that respect, where I pay a lot more attention to the craft and the quality of the lyrics than I used to, and so I hope in return that listeners get more out of them as well. But I think it's very uncommon in a lot of music for that to happen, and I think it's a whole different scenario in the classical music world, because most classical composers don't write their own lyrics. So, so they're starting already with something that's that's presumably interesting, at least to them, to begin with.
Well, and you know who sings lyrics that you can understand are Broadway singers, because like they have to convey the story that's happening. and if you can't understand them, then it's very difficult to understand what's going on in the play.
And your performance style, Corey, kind of gets into musical theater feeling.
Kind of cabaret.
Yeah, and so I think your vocal style
Except that Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying your vocal style and the clearness of your presentation would seem like it would work well in that domain.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do musical theater pieces. I haven't acted in a musical theater piece that's not my own, but I'm currently working on one, and I've done them in the past, using my own music and my own voice and performing in them. I do have a theater background and experience as an actor, but I guess I take issue slightly with the comparison to musical theater, just because musical theater is often so corny.
Yeah.
And I'm really trying not to be corny. I'm trying to be witty and dark and tricky and ironic and deadpan and whatever else, but not corny.
You couldn't possibly be corny because everything from the way the voice sounds in the recording to like the album art, it's very personal and intimate and open. Like you're inviting us to eat your head in the on the album art. In other words, here it is. You're not holding back emotionally, and I think that it comes through, and that couldn't sound corny to me.
Yeah, the album cover was great. It was a great. I actually sat for a sketch by the artist Doug Fitch, who created both the album cover and the music video for the first single from the album, and sitting with him and he did several sketches of me, but it was hours of just sitting there and like looking him in the eye and him looking at me in the eye, and it was a very strange and intimate situation that that turned into this it ended up turning into this really dark and intimate cover art that's also funny and bizarre. I don't know. It was working with Doug is great. You may know him as one of the as the creator, or the director, I should say, the director and designer of Le Grand Macabre that the New York Phil did several years ago, not many years ago, and also some more recent projects with them. But he's done a lot of music theater. I prefer to call it music theater when it's not musical theater, you know. So he's done a lot of those projects, and working with him, I mean, he's such a great thinker and a polymath, and working with him on both the album cover and the music video, and we hope a project that we've conceived of that will be a live project.
With visuals.
It's years away, but it's. I'm
with
sorry?
Visuals?
Yeah, it would actually be a sort of installation with live visuals, projections, videos, puppets, all sorts of things, and music, of course. But
well,
anyway, that's another topic. Oh,
Sam, you there?
Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the call bogged down. Yes, I was gonna say I looked Doug Fitch up this morning, and I immediately came to the conclusion, oh, this guy is a big shot. So you got a big shot to do your music video. So that's cool, and I would love to hear and experience the project that you guys come up with.
Well, I don't think he would describe himself as a big shot, but maybe I would. I mean, but you know, in the nicest sense of the word, because he's an extremely humble and approachable and friendly person, and also extremely talented, and as I said before, just knowledgeable about everything, and so he's a great conversationalist too. So just want to defend him as not the bad kind of big shot.
No, big shot as in he's done a tremendous amount of really nice-looking work.
Yes, he has. And a lot of different kinds of work, including strange conceptual art and really funny murals, and I don't know. He's all over the place, which is great.
Yes, a Fusebox Festival kind of artist, actually.
Yes, indeed.
So you're playing the Fusebox Festival on April 10th. What other projects do you have coming up? Like performances, live performances, or?
I'm looking at going to Portland, doing something there with this project. But I don't know. My performance schedule has been deliberately light as of late, partly for personal reasons because I'm going through some life changes, but also because I'm working on this really large scale music theater piece that that is just eating up a lot of my time in terms of trying to make it a really successful collaboration with a playwright and a director and and other singers besides me. So so it's a big project that's eating up a lot of my time and frankly, to be honest, I mean, yeah, it's about three delusional psychiatric patients who believe that they're Jesus Christ.
All three of them independently.
Yes,
That's brilliant.
It's like a therapy session with all three of them and a psychiatrist. So it's a good thing. It's a fun thing.
That sounds wonderful.
Three different versions of Christ. So.
And so when you're working on this piece,
none of which is kosher.
Sure, sure. I'm curious about working on this piece compared to working on.
Really unfortunate Yiddish term to describe Jesus Christ. Sorry.
Oh boy. Well, we won't tell. It'll be a surprise. I'm curious, listening to you talk about that. What are the differences in working on something like
Netanyahu would be amused.
Sorry, we're having some really weird stuff with the call. Are you guys getting like jumbled up?
Yeah, I'm not sure the timing is correct.
Yeah.
I just made an offensive, well, not an offensive, but a rude joke about Netanyahu. That
well,
was
that's
maybe
really unfortunate.
Unfortunately
was it very erudite?
No, it was pretty juvenile actually.
Oh, okay. Well, it was about Netanyahu, so it could have been in the New Yorker. I want to.
I don't know. The man himself has been fairly juvenile lately, so I don't feel too bad.
I suppose. I'm curious.
Anyway, let's move on to something not political.
Well, this theater piece that you're talking about sounds really interesting, and it also seems like the process of working on it would have to be really different than the process that you described earlier of working on your own songs for yourself to perform. And I'm wondering how that has worked out for you when you're working with other people who are creating some of the parts of a song or a piece that you would normally create yourself, or that you would have a lot more control over, and how you think that is changing the resulting work.
Well, I would say that the most successful collaborations that I have had are with close friends, people I already know, and then we work on something together. And that is the case here, not only with the playwright and the director, but also with the other musicians involved. So I've basically handpicked singers and musicians for this project, and that's why I feel sort of free to do what I mean, to not depart too much from my usual style. I mean, I'm not writing an opera here. This is a Cory Dargle piece, and it's going to sound like it, except it's going to be sung and played by different people, which I think will add a very cool layer to it that's not Cory Dargle sounding. Nevertheless, I mean, I'm writing for singers who are going to sing with microphones, who are going to sing with relatively straight tone and deliver words clearly, but who also have the skills to sing music that that is in 11/8 instead of 4/4, or and they're all sort of groove-oriented musicians, so they can deal with that too, which is not as common as it should be. So anyway, that. And also the playwright and the director and I are friends, and we've worked together before on less involved collaborations. But I just think the secret to being a good collaborator is, first of all, to be extremely generous, and to not be too sacred about your own voice in the project. But also, as the as the ostensible leader of this project, I do have to play that role. So what I've been doing is taking the material that we have created independently and trying to synthesize it in a way that that makes sense. And so doing that, I am altering the material that the playwright has given me, and she and I are going back and forth about that. And but because we're friends and we trust each other, I mean that's the most essential thing. There's nothing worse than collaborating with someone that you don't 100% trust. And so trust is an essential component for me, and I'm not worried about the changes that I'm making, because I know that if the playwright, her name is Honor, if she's not okay with something, she'll let me know, and it won't be a big deal. But that she also trusts me to make something that, you know, she's a playwright, she's not a musician, and so she also trusts me to turn some of the play script that she's written into something that works well with music theater, and she's very generous in that respect. So, but her work is so unique. I wish I could share some of it with you, but it's just not ready yet, because it's just so hard to describe it and do it justice. But she is a player. She is as much of a trickster with language as I am as a lyricist. She just happens to be using language in a play script as opposed to sung language. Anyway, really, I should stop. Yeah.
No, it's great. So that was a really great description of your collaboration. I think where you're very generous and very open to other people, kind of manipulating the things that you're creating and not holding back on manipulating the things that they've created as well, because you have that kind of trust. And it seems like that's the sort of thing where you have to be so selective about the people that you are working with on these kinds of projects. You know, when you described those singers earlier as, you know, these are people who can sing clearly and enunciate and that are comfortable singing in 11/8 and then are going to sing in a straight tone and not, you know, bel canto, and that are and they can do groove-oriented stuff. And I was thinking as you were doing that, like, you're gradually narrowing down the number of singers in the universe that can do this thing until you've probably described, you know, fewer than a dozen people on the planet that meet all those requirements. And I can't wait to hear what it sounds like when you get all of them together.
Well, hopefully, vocal teachers will eventually learn that they need to teach their students to sing this way in the future, because that's the direction I think we're moving in. And to teach any other way is, is antiquated, and all it's going to do is, keep people singing Wagner and, Beethoven, and, well, not Beethoven, but, I don't know. But it's hard to. It's always struck me as extremely strange that 21st century composers are still writing for operatic voices. I mean, we have the technology to deal with with amplified vocals, and singers don't have to strain to be heard. And why not take advantage of that potential clarity, and not only clarity, but the ability to be expressive at a quiet decibel level is much greater, in my opinion, than the ability to be expressive while singing operatically without a microphone. And of course, there's also nothing worse than hearing amplified operatic singing. I mean, that's terrible.
I feel like that's the reason opera singers all hate microphones, is because they've heard amplified opera singers. But that's not what people are doing with microphones.
They need different teachers.
Right.
They need teachers who understand and accept that this is the way things should go. But I don't think that's in any way a mainstream view. In fact, I think it's such not a mainstream view that it's very difficult, as you say, to find singers who can do it. I'm hopeful that as the years progress, that more and more singers will realize that they have to be able to do these things in order to survive as an artist. And not only that, but that they would actually enjoy doing them. So I'm hopeful that more teachers will emerge as the years progress. And I know that they have already started to. So I think there's a sea change that is coming, but the wave is not as big as it should be quite yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, the lack of something as rudimentary as like microphone technique or understanding anything about how to set up an audio system or even the basics of audio recording. I mean, I'm describing the components of your life as a composer and an artist, and most education programs for singers and for other musicians doesn't embrace or only very briefly embraces any of those concepts in an educational sense.
I think that's true. It's a tangent, and I should also point out that although I went to school at Oberlin, which had a strong technological program in terms of recording, production, and engineering, I did not do any of that because at the time I believed it was all BS. And so virtually all of my experience as a producer and an engineer is from being self-taught and from hanging out with people who know what they're doing. So that I think that's important to say, just that I'm self-taught as a lyricist, as a singer, and as a recording engineer, and I think that's an important thing to bring up as I'm talking about, classical pedagogy and the way other vocalists are trained. And the only sort of exception to that is musical theater, which again, I think is, people are taught to be corny, and when they're not presented with lyrics and music that is, where it's obvious what emotion should be conveyed, then they don't know, a lot of them don't know how to approach it. And so my music theater piece is going to be very different from Broadway musicals in that respect, but I hope that it will be compelling as well in that respect, that we're dealing with, I hope we'll be dealing with, performances and content that is both elusive and magnetic and intricate and interesting and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how. I'm sure a sea change is coming. I just fret over how long the sea change is going to take.
I'm not sure it's coming. I'm hopeful that it's coming, but I'm not sure about it.
I'm 100% sure it's coming, but it might be another 200 years. I just hope.
By then, we will need yet another sea change, so we'll be behind the times again, or we'll probably all be. We probably won't be around for 200 years, given the way things are going right now.
Let's keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll be on a different planet.
Or we'll have achieved the singularity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So.
Or we'll all be AIs.
Right. There you go. There's the craziest of the crazy people. Ray Kurzweil thinks that the first immortal generation has already been born, because they'll be subsumed into the computers.
Yeah.
And he's the guy who invented Kurzweil keyboards, right?
Yeah, that's the same. It's the same Ray Kurzweil. Yeah, he now works at Google, and they pay him to just be crazy like that.
Come work for us and be a smart person.
They've got a few people that basically that's their job, is to work at Google and just be really smart. Him and Vint Cerf, the inventor of the internet.
Yes. It's almost like being a professor with tenure. You can get away with anything.
Yeah. Though I think they have even less job description than a professor with tenure, which is pretty astounding.
Yeah. Right.
So we have just a couple of news stories that we wanted to mention this week before we go. If anybody is interested in this next project, you should definitely get on it. The Nashville Symphony Orchestra just announced this week that they are starting a composer lab with Aaron J. Kernis, which seems a lot like the Minnesota Composer Institute that Kernis left during the strike.
Yes.
Is starting up again at Nashville, which is weird because Nashville has also been relatively unstable as orchestra administration goes. But they are starting up a new project there, and the applications for the first round of them are due May 15th. You have to be age 33 or younger. Sorry, Sam. And I think you have to have a less than 15-minute piece, and it's a week-long thing in October. Read the description. It reads almost exactly like the Minnesota Composer
I know.
Institute.
It has to be for an orchestra proper. It can't be only strings or only winds. It can include electronic components and some other multimedia stuff. It's to have the potentially be included in a performance on the 2016-17 season, and as an added bonus, it doesn't say what exactly is involved, but they're collaborating with the Copeland House, and winning or having a piece selected could result in a fellowship at the Copeland House. The people who are selected.
My goodness, talk about bureaucratic nonsense. Like,
yeah.
You really want to enter? You're a composer. You really want to enter this world where you might get these things if the board approves it. You might get this, and you might be able to play. You might have your piece premiered in some season, but only if you write a piece for free and submit it to this concert and don't get any necessarily commissioning money. And
if you're selected, you get the performance and you get $1,000 stipend. They fly you there and put you in a hotel.
$1,000,
and you get $1,000 stipend.
15-minute orchestra piece. Wow, $1,000. I'm sorry,
I don't think it's got to be a new piece.
It's good for students, right?
It doesn't have to be a new. It doesn't have to be a new piece. This is one of the more interesting things to me is it has to be a piece that hasn't been played by an orchestra whose budget is more than $3 million a year. Like, they actually put that stipulation in the description.
Are you gonna figure out? So let me. Sorry, just let me send some emails really quick. What's your annual budget?
Yeah, I thought that was just crazy that was like one of the factors written into the conditions.
I don't want to. So I agree. It's crazy, and I'm certainly not going to send anything in for it. But
I just think you should write anything. I mean, if you're a student and you've already written something, great, do it. But to write something with the hopes that you might be paid $1,000 and it might be premiered or it might not be premiered, even if it's selected.
I think this is more for pieces that people have had track tested a little bit but haven't gotten it done by a really badass orchestra, So this is a chance to take your big orchestral piece that you've gotten done here and there by the volunteer orchestra of wherever university, and but it's a cool piece, and you might have it selected and get a really good recording by a really good orchestra. And for people who are into trying to write orchestral pieces, they need that to push themselves out.
But you get a recording? I didn't hear that part.
Well, I would assume you get a recording.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that when you're dealing with union orchestras. That's
true. Well, then what good is it?
To me, I think the benefit of this is the
you might get a recording that you can't use for anything.
Yeah, that's what you usually get is a recording that you can't use, and like under penalty of death, nobody can ever hear. But I think to me this is more about the workshops with the orchestra and the music director and Kernis than it is about the performance itself, which is basically what the Minnesota Institute was. And when we talked to Kernis when he left Minnesota Orchestra Institute, that was something that really kind of was sad to him because he really enjoyed working with the young composers that he got to work with there. If you've got something ready to go, send it in. But I think, like we kind of said, it's a bit of a crapshoot. We also learned this week that the new music rock star.
I just want to plug. Kernis is a great orchestrator and a great person to be teaching this. So that's definitely a reason to sign up if you can afford to do it.
Yeah, isn't this a little like sort of like a kung fu theater like rival dojo kind of scenario? Like they reconstituted the program. They reconstituted the program.
Yeah, I don't know either.
They reconstituted the program in Minnesota, right? And so now.
Oh, right, and Kevin Putz runs the one in Minnesota now.
Yeah, so like the plot is thickening for the showdown where they're gonna brawl.
Yeah.
He's also oh, wow, that's tough. A tough choice.
So now we need a montage of somebody working on their orchestration with the new.
With Kevin Putz looking on one side and Aaron J. Kernis looking on the other side.
Yes. So anyway, it just means more opportunities for people who write orchestra pieces.
Yeah. We also learned this week that we're going to have a new flutist in I almost said Alarmville Town, in 8th Blackbird. The new music Rockstar Chamber Ensemble out of Chicago, Tim Monroe, is going to be leaving to work on solo projects. I can't imagine what the touring demands are on people in a group like that, but he was in the group for something like 9 years, and they've got I'm gonna go with the pronunciation of Natalie Joachim or Joachim coming in as the new flutist, and check out her background. It's pretty cool stuff. She's done a lot of really cool kind of crossover, not quite beatbox flute kind of stuff, but along those lines. So be very interested to see what kinds of things she brings to the group going forward. Sam, did you have anything else that you wanted to bring up?
Nope, that's it.
So, Corey, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We really enjoyed talking to you, and sorry for the technical weirdness in some of those places, but we really enjoyed the conversation.
I enjoy weirdness, and I enjoyed being here, so thank you for having me.
So, if people wanted to find out more about what you have going on, Corey, where should they go?
They can always visit my website, which is, I guess the easiest way to say it is CoreyDargle.com, and it's spelled CoreyDargel, and they could also look up Fusebox Festival, and there's a page on there about my event, which is on April 10th at 10:30 p.m. Austin time. So yeah.
So definitely check out Corey's site if you're listening to this, and check out the festival, and check out his music on Bandcamp. The Bandcamp system we've talked about before is wonderful, but you should definitely check out his music on Bandcamp, and we'll have links to all of those things in our show notes at soundnotion.tv/SN. You can connect with us on Facebook, on Twitter. We're at SoundNotion on Twitter. Subscribe to this show and all our shows. Leave us a review in iTunes. That helps us out a lot. Thank you so much for listening this week, and we'll see you back next week.